I used to believe that blended families could heal old wounds. When Mom remarried Gerald 6 years ago, I was 21, trying to navigate college and life after my parents' messy divorce. Gerald seemed decent enough bringing along his son, Dylan, who was 19. For the first 6 months, everything appeared normal. We ate dinners together, watched movies, even went camping once. But there were small signs I ignored. Little things that did not make sense. Until that Friday afternoon when everything shattered in a way I could never have imagined. Before we go further, drop a comment and let me know where you are watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe, because what happened next changed everything I thought I knew about family loyalty and justice. Moving back home after finishing my junior year seemed like a smart financial decision. Student loans were piling up and Mom's new house had plenty of space. Gerald worked as a regional manager for a logistics company pulling in decent money. He had this easygoing demeanor, always cracking jokes at dinner, asking about my classes. Dylan was quieter. He had dropped out of community college after one semester and picked up a part-time work at an auto repair shop downtown. He kept to himself mostly, which I appreciated. I was not looking for a best friend, just peaceful coexistence. Those first 6 months felt almost normal. We established routines. Gerald grilled burgers every Sunday. Mom made her famous lasagna on Wednesdays. Dylan and I did not talk much, but that seemed fine. He would nod when we passed in the hallway occasionally, grunt a greeting. I figured he needed time to adjust just like I did. Mom seemed happier than she had been in years, and that mattered most to me. But small things started happening around month 7. I would leave my headphones on my desk and they would vanish. A week later, they would reappear in the bathroom. My old wallet disappeared from my dresser drawer. I found it 3 weeks later in the garage, tucked behind a toolbox. Little items kept shifting around. Keys, a watch my grandfather gave me, even a hoodie I rarely wore. When I mentioned it to Dylan, he just shrugged and said he had not touched anything. One Saturday morning, I walked into the kitchen and froze. Dylan was sitting at the table wearing my college hoodie, the navy blue one with my university logo across the chest. He looked right at me, took a sip of coffee, and smiled slightly. I kept my voice calm. I asked him why he was wearing my clothes. He set the mug down slowly and said it was just lying there in the laundry room. I told him I had left it in my closet. He stood up, walked past me, and said, "Maybe I should keep better track of my stuff then." I went to Mom that afternoon, told her everything. The missing items, the weird behavior, now him taking my clothes. She was folding laundry in the den, and she barely looked up. She said boys will be boys, and that I was overthinking things. She suggested Dylan was probably just trying to bond with me in his own awkward way. I felt frustration rising, but pushed it down. Gerald appeared in the doorway, having overheard. He put a hand on my shoulder and said Dylan had a hard time making friends and probably saw me as a brother figure. He asked me to give Dylan more time. I nodded, but something felt wrong. Summer arrived and I graduated with my marketing degree. Landing an entry-level position at a downtown firm felt like a huge victory. Mom and Gerald took me out to celebrate. Dylan came along but sat silent through the entire dinner. When Gerald raised a toast to my future, I noticed Dylan's hands clenched into fists under the table. His jaw was tight. I tried to make eye contact to include him somehow, but he stared at his plate until we left. The tension grew thicker. I started getting home from work around 6:30 each evening. Dylan's shift at the garage ended at 4, so he was always home first. One Thursday night, I came back late after a client meeting ran long. It was almost 9. I climbed the stairs to my room, pushed open the door, and my stomach dropped. Dylan was sitting at my desk, my laptop open in front of him. He was scrolling through something completely absorbed. I asked what he was doing. He did not jump or look startled. He just slowly turned his head toward me and stood up. He walked right up until we were barely a foot apart and asked if I thought I was better than him. His voice was low and even, which made it more unsettling. I took a step back and said I did not think anything like that. I just wanted him to stay out of my room. He stood there for another few seconds, then walked past me and down the hall without another word. I locked my door after that, started keeping my laptop in my car overnight. But the feeling of being watched never left. I would catch Dylan staring at me during dinner. Long, intense stares that made my skin crawl. When I met his eyes, he would not look away. He would just keep staring until I broke contact first. October rolled around, bringing cooler weather and a heavy workload at the office. I had been putting in extra hours trying to prove myself. That particular Friday, my boss let me leave at noon as a thank you for closing a difficult account. I drove home, feeling good, looking forward to a quiet afternoon. Maybe I would catch up on sleep or watch something mindless on television. The house was quiet when I walked in. Gerald was at work. Mom had mentioned she was meeting friends for lunch and shopping. I assumed Dylan was at the garage. I climbed the stairs thinking about changing into comfortable clothes. I pushed open my bedroom door and stopped cold. Dylan was standing in the middle of my room holding something in his right hand. A hunting knife. One from Gerald's collection that usually hung in the downstairs den. The blade was about 7 inches long, curved slightly. Dylan was just standing there, turning it slowly, watching light reflect off the steel. My heart started pounding. I asked him what he was doing. He did not answer right away, just kept turning that knife. Then he looked up at me and his expression was completely blank. He said this should have been his room. This should have been his house. His voice was flat matter-of-fact. I forced myself to stay calm. I told him we could talk about whatever was bothering him, but he needed to put the knife down first. He took a step toward me instead. Said he was sick of everyone treating me like I was special, that I was nothing. Just someone who walked into their lives and took everything. I raised my hands, palms out. Told him that was not true, that I never wanted to take anything from him, that we could figure this out. He took another step. Then another. I backed toward the door, but he was faster. He closed the distance in a rush, and suddenly there was a sharp, terrible pain in my left side just below my ribs. It felt like someone had pressed a hot iron into my skin. I looked down and saw the handle of the knife sticking out of my body. Dylan's hand was still wrapped around it. He pulled it out, and the pain exploded into something unbearable. I felt warmth spreading across my shirt. Blood. So much blood. My legs gave out. I hit the floor hard, landing on my side. The impact sent another wave of pain through me. I could not catch my breath. Each inhale felt like glass scraping my insides. Dylan stood over me, still holding the knife. His hand was shaking now. He looked at the blade, then at me, then at the blood pooling on the carpet. His mouth opened like he wanted to say something, but nothing came out. I tried to yell for help, but my voice came out weak. I managed to say the word help barely above a whisper. Footsteps pounded up the stairs. Mom and Gerald must have just gotten home. Perfect timing, I thought. They would call an ambulance. Everything would be okay. The door flew open. Mom rushed in, first Gerald right behind her. They both froze, taking in the scene. Me on the floor, blood everywhere, Dylan standing there with the knife. I looked at Mom and tried to speak, told her to call an ambulance. Please, I needed help. But she did not move toward the phone. She looked at Dylan, then at Gerald. Gerald stepped forward, looked down at me, and something impossible happened. He laughed. Not a big laugh, just a small chuckle like he had just heard a mildly funny joke. Mom asked Dylan what happened. Her voice was calm, almost casual. Dylan said I attacked him first, that he was defending himself. I tried to protest, but talking made the pain worse. Gerald looked at me again and said something about boys and their roughhousing. He called it a scratch. Asked if I was going to be okay, like I had skinned my knee. Mom nodded along. Told me not to be so dramatic. Said I would be fine. I could not process what was happening. I was bleeding out on my bedroom floor, and my mother was telling me I was exaggerating. I begged them again to call for help. Gerald actually smiled and said I was making too big a deal out of this, that we could handle it at home. Dylan set the knife down on my desk. His posture relaxed. He looked almost relieved, like he knew his father would protect him no matter what. Panic gave me a surge of strength. I rolled onto my stomach, ignoring the screaming pain in my side, and crawled toward my nightstand. My phone was charging there. I could barely see through the tears and sweat, but I grabbed it and managed to dial 911. The operator answered. I gave them the address and said I had been stabbed, that I needed an ambulance immediately. The operator said help was on the way and to stay on the line. Everything started going fuzzy around the edges. I heard sirens in the distance, then nothing. I woke up 3 days later in a hospital bed. Bright fluorescent lights, the smell of antiseptic, tubes connected to my arms. A nurse noticed I was awake and called for a doctor. She explained that I had been in surgery for 5 hours. The knife had missed my lung by less than a quarter inch. The blade had nicked my diaphragm and caused significant internal bleeding. They had to give me 6 units of blood. Another few minutes without treatment, and I would not have made it. A police officer came by that afternoon, a detective named Harris, middle-aged with tired eyes. He asked if I felt strong enough to talk. I said yes. He pulled out a notebook and asked me to walk him through what happened. I told him everything. How Dylan had been acting strange for months. How he took my things. How I found him in my room with the knife. How he attacked me. How my mother and Gerald refused to call for help. Detective Harris wrote it all down. He asked if I had any proof of Dylan's behavior before the attack. I mentioned text messages I had sent to friends complaining about weird things happening. Emails to my roommate from college about feeling uncomfortable at home. The detective nodded and said that would help. Dylan had been arrested at the scene. Paramedics had called the police when they saw the nature of my injuries and heard the 911 recording. Gerald immediately hired an expensive lawyer who was already trying to spin the story, claiming it was an accident, that Dylan and I had been arguing and things got out of hand, that it was self-defense. The detective told me not to worry. The evidence was clear. My wounds, the 911 call the fact that Dylan's fingerprints were the only ones on the knife. It would go to trial. Mom never visited me in the hospital. Not once during the 2 weeks I stayed there. Gerald came by one time, but only to ask if I would consider not pressing charges. He said Dylan was just a confused kid who made a mistake. I told him to leave. A social worker named Patricia stopped by on my 5th day. She was kind, soft-spoken. She asked about my living situation. whether I had somewhere safe to go when I was discharged. I told her about my grandmother, my mother's mother, who lived in Arizona. Patricia helped me make the call. My grandmother said she would fly out immediately and that I could stay with her as long as I needed. The months that followed were a blur of medical appointments, physical therapy for the muscle damage, and meetings with the prosecutor's office. The assistant district attorney assigned to my case was a woman named Sandra Chen. No, wait, Sandra Martinez. She was sharp and determined. She told me they were charging Dylan with assault with a deadly weapon and attempted murder. The evidence was overwhelming. The 911 recording alone was damning. I had clearly stated I was stabbed and needed help. Neighbors had also given statements. Apparently, several people had witnessed Dylan acting aggressively toward me in the past. One neighbor said she saw him following me to my car one morning, yelling something she could not make out. The prosecution also found something I did not know existed. The house next door had a security camera pointed toward our driveway. It had caught Dylan walking across the yard with the knife 30 minutes before I came home. Proof that he had taken the weapon and gone to my room before I even arrived. That detail turned the case from a heat-of-the-moment argument into premeditated assault. 6 months after the attack, the trial began. I had moved to Arizona by then, living with my grandmother in a quiet suburb outside Phoenix. I flew back for the proceedings. Walking into that courtroom felt surreal. Dylan sat at the defense table in a suit looking younger than I remembered. Gerald and Mom sat directly behind him in the gallery. They were dressed nicely, talking to each other in low voices, occasionally smiling like they were at a social event instead of a criminal trial. I sat on the opposite side with Sandra Martinez and my grandmother, who had insisted on coming for support. The trial lasted 3 days. Dylan's lawyer argued that I had provoked his client, that I had been hostile toward Dylan from the beginning, that the attack happened during a heated argument where both of us lost control. But Sandra systematically destroyed that narrative. She presented the security footage showing Dylan with the knife before I got home. She played the 911 recording where I could barely speak, begging for help. A medical expert testified about the angle and depth of the wound. Said it required significant force and that the position of the injury made it impossible for it to be accidental or defensive. It was an attack, plain and simple. Character witnesses took the stand. My former roommate testified that I had called him multiple times worried about Dylan's behavior. A coworker said I had mentioned feeling unsafe at home. My grandmother spoke about how withdrawn and scared I seemed when I first arrived in Arizona. Then Sandra called neighbors. The woman next door described seeing Dylan watch me through the window. Another neighbor said he once saw Dylan slashing my car tires in the middle of the night, though he had not reported it at the time because he was not sure what he saw. Dylan did not testify. His lawyer advised against it. But Gerald took the stand. He tried to paint Dylan as misunderstood, as someone struggling with mental health issues that the family was trying to address. He claimed I had been antagonistic and dismissive of Dylan's attempts at friendship. Sandra cross-examined him brutally, asked why, if Dylan was struggling so severely, Gerald had not gotten him professional help. Asked why Gerald did not call an ambulance when he saw me bleeding. Asked why he laughed. Gerald stammered, said he was in shock and did not remember laughing. But the prosecutor played body camera footage from the responding officers. Gerald could be heard in the background making jokes about me being dramatic. Mom did not testify. The defense never called her. I wondered if even Dylan's lawyer realized she would do more harm than good. After 3 days of testimony, the jury deliberated for only 4 hours. When they filed back into the courtroom, my hands were shaking. The forewoman stood and read the verdict. Guilty on all charges. Assault with a deadly weapon. Attempted murder. Dylan's face went white. Gerald shot to his feet, shouting that this was ridiculous, that his son was just a kid. The judge banged her gavel and told him to sit down or be removed. Mom started crying, loud, gasping sobs. But she was not looking at me. She was looking at Dylan. The judge set sentencing for 2 weeks later. When that day came, the courtroom was packed. The judge, an older woman with steel-gray hair and a no-nonsense expression, reviewed the case details. She noted the premeditation, the severity of the attack, the lack of remorse shown by the defendant. Then she pronounced the sentence, 25 years to life. Dylan would be eligible for parole after serving 25 years, but there was no guarantee he would ever be released. He would be in his mid-40s before he could even apply. The bailiff moved to take him into custody. Dylan looked back at Gerald and Mom. His face crumpled. Gerald was shaking his head, tears streaming down his face. Mom had her head in her hands. For the first time since this nightmare began, Gerald and Mom looked toward me. Their faces were pale with shock. The smiles were gone. The laughter had died the moment the judge spoke those words. 25 years to life. They looked like they could not believe this was real. Like they had been certain the system would see things their way. That somehow their son, their golden child, would walk free. But reality had finally caught up with them. I sat there feeling numb. No satisfaction, no triumph. Just a hollow sense of relief. It was over. Dylan could not hurt me again. Justice had been served even if it felt empty. After the sentencing, I walked out of the courthouse with my grandmother. She held my arm steady and reassuring. Gerald tried to approach me in the parking lot. He called my name. I kept walking. He called again, louder. Said we needed to talk. That this was not fair. That Dylan was his son, and he was just trying to protect him. I turned around, looked him in the eye, and told him that I was his stepson, and he let me bleed on the floor while he laughed. Then I got in my grandmother's car, and we drove away. Mom tried to contact me over the following months. Phone calls, emails, letters, all saying the same things. That she was sorry, that she did not know what she was thinking, that she loved me, that we were still family. I never responded. Some things cannot be fixed with apologies. Some betrayals cut too deep. I stayed in Arizona, found a job at a creative agency in downtown Phoenix. The work was challenging but rewarding. I started seeing a therapist twice a week. Dr. Williams, a kind man in his 50s who specialized in trauma. The nightmares were bad at first. I would wake up feeling the knife in my side, gasping for air. Some nights I could not sleep at all. But slowly, week by week, things got better. Dr. Williams taught me techniques to manage the anxiety, to separate the past from the present, to reclaim my sense of safety. I also found a support group for people who had experienced family violence. Sitting in that circle of strangers who understood, who had their own stories of betrayal and survival, helped more than I expected. I was not alone. Others had walked this path and come out the other side. Listening to them gave me hope that I could do the same. I made new friends, people who had no connection to my past, who knew me as Jack, the guy from the agency who made them laugh and was reliable and treated them with respect. I started dating again after about a year. Nothing serious at first, just reminding myself that not everyone would hurt me, that trust was still possible. Gradually, the nightmares faded. The anxiety loosened its grip. I still had bad days, moments when something would trigger a memory, and I would feel that sharp pain in my side all over again. But those moments became less frequent. The good days started to outnumber the bad. I thought a lot about family during that time. What it means, what it should mean. I realized that family is not just about blood or marriage certificates. It is about who shows up when things fall apart, who stands beside you in the worst moments. My grandmother did that. My friends did that. Even my therapist and the people in my support group did that. They became my real family, the one I chose, the one that chose me back. I also learned to trust my instincts again, to listen when something feels wrong. I had ignored so many warning signs with Dylan because I wanted to believe in the idea of a blended family. I wanted to make it work. But sometimes things are broken in ways you cannot fix. Sometimes the healthiest choice is to walk away. Justice is a strange thing. It does not always come quickly. Sometimes it does not come at all. But in this case, it did. The system worked the way it was supposed to. Dylan was held accountable for what he did. That gave me a sense of closure I did not know I needed. It validated my experience, confirmed that what happened to me was real and serious and wrong, that I was not overreacting or being dramatic. I was a victim of a violent crime, and the person who hurt me was punished. But justice did not erase the pain. It did not give me back the relationship with my mother. It did not undo the trauma. It just drew a line, before and after, and it gave me permission to move forward. Now, 3 years later, I live in a small apartment in Tempe. I got promoted at work. I have a solid group of friends. I am seeing someone, a teacher named Amy, who is patient and kind and makes me laugh. Life is not perfect, but it is mine. I built it from the ground up after everything fell apart. The scar on my side is still there, a thin line of raised tissue that I see every time I look in the mirror. It reminds me of where I have been, but it does not define where I am going. I think about Dylan sometimes. Wonder if he has changed, if he understands what he did, if he feels remorse. But mostly, I just feel sad for the person he could have been if things had been different. If Gerald had gotten him help instead of enabling him. If my mother had chosen to protect me instead of looking the other way. And I think about Mom. Part of me still loves her. She raised me. She was there for birthday parties and school plays and all the ordinary moments of childhood. But another part of me cannot forgive her for what she did that day, for choosing her new husband and his son over her own child, for laughing while I bled. Maybe one day I will be ready to talk to her, to hear her apology, but not yet. Maybe not ever. And I have made peace with that. The most important lesson I learned is this. Sometimes the people who should protect you are the ones you need protection from. And sometimes the only family you need is the one you build yourself. Not the one you are born into or the one created by marriage, but the one you choose. The people who see you at your worst and love you anyway. Who believe you when you say you are hurting. Who show up again and again no matter what. I stand at my apartment window now, looking out over the city as the sun sets. The sky is painted in shades of orange and pink. I feel something I did not think I would feel again. Peace. Not happiness exactly. Not yet. But a quiet sense that I am going to be okay. that I already am okay. The past will always be part of my story. The scars will always be there. But they do not own me anymore. I survived, and now I am learning to live. So let me ask you this. Have you ever had to cut ties with family to protect yourself? Have you ever had to choose your own well-being over loyalty to people who hurt you? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I would love to hear your stories. And if this resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe for more real stories about survival and healing. Share this with someone who might need to hear it. Thank you for listening. I hope you find your own peace, whatever that looks like. Take care of yourselves out there. You deserve it.